thank you again for joining this format, South Caucasus Dialogue Platform format meetings. We started it on behalf of my Border Zone Media Project in January. I think it's fourth meeting now, and I hope it is useful and informative for our guests. Today we have very interesting speakers, and I'm grateful for you for joining today. It's Mr. Rичард Гирагосян, Director of Regional Studies Center, Mr. Ahmad Alili, Director of Caucasus Policy Analysis Center, Sergi Kапanaadze, who is the founder of Georgian Reforms Associates, GRAS, Ambassador retired Yan Kelli, who was an ambassador to Georgia and OSCE. And in the second half, Ambassador Gigi Gigиадзе from EPRC will also present us his new op-ed, very interesting material about regional formats, and we will discuss it further. So today I would like to start with the first half, talking about regional developments, how you see it at the moment, your analysis. We have many news coming every day. Actually, in Georgia, during these 2 days, we had a visit of Secretary of Defense of the United States. Today and yesterday in Azerbaijan, and today in Georgia, we have NATO Special Representative, Mr. Javier Colomina, and like lots of developments, including statements of Prime Minister Pashinyan, who last week he said that he's ready, Armenia is ready to open communications. We saw tensions between Azerbaijan and Iran, so lots of very interesting developments. And I would like to start, please, with Mr. Rичард Гирагосян, Director of Regional Studies Center, and please provide your vision of what's going on behalf of, from the view of Armenia. 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. One clarification, we're starting from Armenia in alphabetical order, without any political symbolism. But I am fortunate to begin because I would highlight 2 positive recent developments. And it's rare enough that we can actually talk about positive developments in the post-war situation. The first positive trend is something that happened in New York, of all places, last month on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. We see the beginning of an important return to diplomacy, a resumption of diplomatic mediation by the OSCE's Minsk group, and a very significant meeting between the Armenian and Azerbaijani foreign ministers. In this context, it's very important that there is no alternative but a return to diplomacy. And this resumption of diplomatic engagement is also significant given the agreement for the return of the OSCE Minsk group to the region before the end of the year. At the same time, this also establishes an opening and an opportunity for both U.S. re-engagement and also European engagement. The second positive development from the Armenian perspective is the one area of quiet diplomacy that has been successful, the working group on the restoration of trade and transport between Armenia and Azerbaijan under Russian facilitation. The resumption of these meetings and this working group offers a broader opportunity, including Armenia-Turkey normalization and a recognition that economics and trade are now, for the first time ever, more important and effective incentives for post-war stability. Against that backdrop, however, and as significant as these 2 opportunities are, it's very important from an Armenian perspective that the lingering challenge and urgency of the full and complete return of all prisoners of war be completed in order to strengthen the increasingly fragile ceasefire. The second challenge is the challenge to Georgia. From an Armenian perspective, the bilateral relationship with Georgia has gained increased significance. Georgian mediation is now much more welcome and much more effective, especially given perhaps a Russian challenge or agenda to try to isolate Georgia from the broader regional context. So let me stop here and note and reiterate the rare degree of 2 positive developments. the resumption of diplomacy, and renewed focus on the working group on trade and transport. And a final opportunity could be a breakthrough following the Armenian Prime Minister's announcement in terms of also the formation of a second new working group to provide a legal institutional basis for border demarcation. And that's something we're working on now. So I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I'll have some questions to you in the second half. And now, Mr. Ahmad Alili, could you please make your remarks and, if it's possible, say at least something briefly about the situation between Azerbaijan and Iran, because it's very interesting for international community as well. Please.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I would love to build my speech on Richard's notes. I believe that he touched on very important issues, and the most important issue that the announcement that we saw today morning, it's about the restoration of the working group. I believe it's related to Iran also, because somehow Russia found itself in a place where everybody wants to get to become a significant player in the South Caucasus. And so that's why Russia has to do a lot. Russia understands that if it doesn't act, so it means that the others are willing to be more important players in the region. Hence, we saw that before the meeting of the in Belarus of the Commonwealth of Independent States, the Putin and the Pashinyan meeting in Moscow, and that was a quite game-changing moment. It means that Moscow intensifies its efforts to for the implementation of the agreements in the three-party statement. But it all started with Iran, I would say, in the recent weeks. What happened with Iran, it was a clear message to Russia also, as I mentioned, that it should get active. But why is happening with Iran? There are, I can say that we all agree that it's not a simple issue. Azerbaijani-Iranian relations, they never been a simple issue. But there could be some points that we should mention. First of all, I believe that Israel and Turkey gaining ground on the in the South Caucasus, and many people in Azerbaijan, they started sympathizing Israel, and I believe that large chunk of the Iranian Azerbaijanis, and they are Iranian citizens, suddenly they are start sympathizing Israel also because of the Israel's assistance to Azerbaijan during the 40 war. And also, I believe that in Iran, they believe that everybody gained something in the aftermath of the 44-day war, but Iran. And it is quite a nervous moment for the decision makers in Tehran, because they see Turkish advancement in the region, they see Israel advancement in the region, they see Russian advancement in the region, they see the frequent visits from the high-ranking European and the United States officials to the region, but there is no place for Iran, and that makes Iran a bit nervous, and Iran has to act. So that's why Iran wants to be more bold, and they understand that they have to make sure that the new developments that are going to take place about the corridors, about transit routes, everybody listen to Iran, and Iran has something to say on this issue. But there is also a few comments about the regional platform, but I believe that we are going to discuss it, so that's why I'm going to stop here and then leave it back to you. Thank you.
But may I ask one little additional question just to close maybe this issue for this discussion, because yeah, we will discuss regional formats. Could you please tell me this recent statement by Prime Minister Pashinyan from Azerbaijani perspective, does it mean that communications will start opening in upcoming future, or is still some tricky intrigue that we will monitor and see in upcoming months?
It's definitely a positive signal for Azerbaijan, but still, Azerbaijan is talking about the corridors, and Armenia talks about the transit the links. That's the difference. So Azerbaijan, in the 9th clause of the three-party statement, it says that Armenia should not block any transport links between Azerbaijan, mainland Azerbaijan, and Nakhchivan. So there should be no border check and the customs check. So that is what Azerbaijan means when it says a transit corridor. So the ninth clause of the three-party statement, that there's a specific word about that. If you compare it to what it says about the Lachin corridor, there is nothing about that there should not be any blockage of the transit route. But when it talks about the transit links connecting Azerbaijan to mainland Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan, that's what's saying. So Prime Minister Pashinyan's statement that lacked that point, that it was not clear enough. So that's why I believe that it leaves a lot of questions open. But again, it's a positive signal to Azerbaijan.
I think I would ask Mr. Rичард Гирагосян in the next half to comment or maybe to provide Armenian position in this regard. And now, please, Mr. Sergi Kапanaze from GRES, Georgian perspective, Georgian developments. What is the most important now? You saw lots of visits from the United States, from European Union these days. What does it mean? And how do you evaluate current situation? And then we will talk about 3+3 and other formats in the second half. Please, Sergi Kапanaze.
Thank you. Good to see you, all the friends from different parts of the world. I hope you can hear me. So since we're talking about positive and negative, I would agree with Егор that the visits that we've had during these last days from the US Secretary of Defense, from NATO, several member states of the European Union, high officials, this is all good. And I think I would hope that this means the re-emergence of interest toward this region and towards Georgia. In general, I wouldn't be that optimistic, having, for instance, taken part in the Leonard Mary conference and the Warsaw Security Forum just recently in the last month and a half or so. I don't really see among the policymakers and decision makers such an increased interest toward Georgia and towards this part of the world, which I think is bad, but I hope that this might rebound. Now, in terms of what's been happening here, you've all been following, I'm sure, the elections and the issues related to Saakashvili's arrest. I think that all is a bit of a problem. We saw now Misha coming back and being arrested. Basically, what happened here is that we had the first round of the local elections in which the Georgian Dream managed to clear the 43%, which was supposed to be a precondition for the new parliamentary elections, so they are safe there, but they managed to lose all major cities. In fact, they lost in Zugdidi, in Kutaisi, and didn't win in any of the major cities. And now we have the second rounds on October the 30th. Elections were with a number of problems. OSCE and the other observers noted it. I'm not going to go into those details. So still the electoral problems persist here. But the biggest problem right now, what we see is the arrest of the political opponents, Saakashvili behind the bars, and what this could mean for the future of democracy here. Because if Georgian Dream manages to get away with it, if they manage to secure the majorities in the second round, with all the instruments that they are using, including the illegal instruments, I'm sure it will pave way for their further punitive actions towards everyone, towards the political opposition, towards the NGOs, towards the media. We see the resumption of the cases against the media owners. The Formula's owner was the recent one, but also TV Pirelli and Tawari. So media is under attack. Opposition is under attack. So if they can get away with Saakashvili's arrest, and with his health condition deteriorating because of the hunger strike, I think they will make even more bold steps. And I think what we don't see is so far sufficient Western attention towards this. We saw a very interesting letter of quite high-profile and influential policymakers, members of European Parliament yesterday, raising concern about these developments. But we don't actually see the approach from the government which would be conducive to sorting out these problems. In fact, in the last month or so, we've seen an increase of the anti-Western, anti-American, anti-EU statements from the side of the government. That would be one thing that I would point out as a serious issue of concern from my side. Finally, maybe before we move on to the 3+3 and the other regional things on which I can talk later, the other thing I wanted to point out is that something that might have slipped the attention of some of the Georgia and the region watchers is the so-called Pandora Papers. I don't know if you've noticed, but in Pandora Papers, one thing that emerged is the interest of Mr. Ivanishvili in the Poti port, the alternative of the Anaklia port. That is something that that might have stayed under the radar, but we all know that Anaklia port has been torpedoed by the government. There have been a number of speculations why that happened, whether this was the influence and interest of Russia, whether this was the interest of Mr. Ivanishvili not to empower the ones who were doing the port, Mr. Khazaladze and Japaridze. But now we also saw a third part, which is his personal commercial interest in the alternative to the Anaklia port. And so that is another thing that I think we all need to keep in mind when we talk about the importance of Georgia for the strategic interests of the West, or our strategic interests, all kinds of infrastructure projects and others. But I'll come back to the regional format, which I think is another interesting development here, something that has been under discussion in the last few weeks or so.
And I would add maybe that, yeah, Anaklia Port and other projects like this are very, very important for regional cooperation as well, because it could make Georgia a very interesting hub for many countries for trade and etc. Let's see. Thanks a lot, Mr. Kapanadze. Ambassador Kelly, could you please, and I think it will be our starting point to discuss regional cooperation and different forms or formats for this regional cooperation. Ambassador Kelly, could you please point out like Western role in current developments in Georgia and the region? And I'm very happy that we talk about it today because of all of these visits that we have now to today and yesterday. Maybe a week ago, it would be like, it could be much more difficult to talk about the Western role, but now we see it very clear. Ambassador Kelly, please.
Thank you very much, Yegor, for having me on. This is I think, a very important discussion and a very topical discussion. I want to talk a few minutes from the perspective of the OSCE, and specifically the OSCE Minsk Group. As many of you know, I was the interim co-chair, American co-chair, for about 10 months between 2012 and 2013. And there were some underlying principles for the possible resolution for the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. And in my first meeting with the foreign ministers, a senior Azerbaijani official took me aside and said, I want you to know that Azerbaijan has one red line, and that's no Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh. And I remember distinctly his reason was once Russian peacekeepers arrive, they never leave. And so when I heard about the resolution of, or the ceasefire, I should say, not the resolution of that terrible war last year, I was distressed, if not surprised, that it was a Russian-only peacekeeping force. And this is, I think, indicative of Russia's attempts really to assert as much as possible its hegemony over its former imperial lands in the South Caucasus. But I also very regretfully have to say that this Russianization of the negotiations and of the peacekeeping really has been enabled by the West. I have seen over the years a willingness by the West to subcontract the negotiations between the sides to Russia, and unfortunately a disengagement of senior American officials from the problem. And I think under Obama, it was very much a transactional approach to it. What's in it for the United States? Is this something that the president can put in his win column? And of course, we couldn't say that. And there was a similar disengagement from Paris as well. So we are faced now, I think, with instead of having an inclusive engagement of the West in the conflict, we are seeing, as I say, the Russianization of it. And then with this 3+3 mechanism, we are seeing actually the three illiberal and former imperial powers in a new multilateral format. That is, of course, Turkey, Iran, and Russia. So I was very pleased to see Secretary of Defense Austin go to Georgia and talk about how important the region is to the United States. And I would hope that going forward, that the West, Europe, and the United States would look at more connectivity with this area rather than exclusively making it the purview of Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Revive these connections. And of course, the connective tissue here is the Black Sea, and the West desperately needs a Black Sea policy.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador Kelly. And after other statements and speeches, I will ask you a second question, and I will ask you to think about it. My question will be, what could West do in reality on practice on the ground? And of course, yes, Russia is like a leader of the process at the moment, but maybe the West didn't do something to become, I don't know, try to engage as well, starting October, November 2020. I mean, the Karabakh War. So the question will be, what should West do in this regard? For now, I will ask Ambassador Giggiadze. EPRC, and I think Ambassador Giggiadze as well, prepared very interesting material about 3+3 format and the view from Georgia on this format. So please, could you please present this material?
Yes, thank you very much. Once again, good evening, and thank you to all participants for the interesting topic and interesting discussion, and thank you, Егор, for having me on this panel. Yes, as you correctly mentioned, we have prepared the new op-ed co-authored by the Ambassador Shotaguineria and the executive editor of the American Interest Georgia, Mr. Zaza Shengelia. And we try to analyze the history of the similar so-called regional initiatives coming from the different parties and stakeholders throughout the last 30 years, and how they have evolved throughout this time, and why the Georgia should immediately reject any kind of initiative or proposal where the Russia will be the part of. First of all, Russia is well known. Russia doesn't recognize the Georgian territorial integrity and sovereignty, and it currently occupies more than 20% of our land. And from the Russian perspective, it's actually not 3+3 means 8 and not 6. So agree to participate in any format with Russia will automatically mean that Georgia de facto accepts the reality which Russia would like to portray, and accepts the losing of its territorial integrity and sovereignty. And of course, it heavily damages the Georgian standing in the eyes of our Western partners and Western allies. Secondly, as you already mentioned, Russia tries to portray itself as the main negotiator, as main, as peacekeeper, if you wish, in the region. And it will try through any such kind of formats to isolate the West from this part of Europe, and to gain the upper hand on the political decision-making in this process of the peace building. But of course, Georgia, from the Georgian perspective, it will, of course, be heavily, it will be very heavy to accept that it will not be considered anymore as a foothold of the Western interests and the Western values in the region. So we try to analyze all these topics very thoroughly in our op-ed, which has been, by the way, currently published in the Georgian language, but tomorrow it will fall in the English translation, will follow shortly. So you are very much welcome to have a read, and please stay tuned. Yeah, I mean, this topic remains very interesting after the recent statement of our Minister of Foreign Affairs about the possibility of considering the possibilities of our participation in any major regional installations and regional projects. Thank you very much once again, and please feel free to ask. I'll be very happy to participate in any conversation on that matter. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I will send the link for this video together with the link for this op-ed in English language so everyone could read it. Mr. Rishad Giragosyan, please, I would like to ask you two things. First, if you can please, and it is connected with regional formats, provide briefly, if possible, position in regard to opening communications, whether Armenia is opening communications. And the second issue, of course, what is Armenian position towards 3+3 format or other regional cooperation formats? Do you see any, if Armenia is not like supporting this one, for example, do you see any other offers that could be initiated, please?
Well, first of all, I think for Armenia, there's no alternative. In other words, the restoration of trade and transport, the opening of closed borders, the establishment of new links is a way for Armenia to overcome isolation, and in many ways for Armenia to be more of a transit state to counter the overdependence on Russia. So I really don't think there's much debate in Armenia, whether it's opening the borders and reopening the border with Turkey. At the same time, however, border demarcation is also essential in terms of a de-escalation of border clashes, incursions into Armenia. This is something quite separate and distinct from the Nagorno-Karabakh peace process. But I do think Armenia really has no alternative but to proceed with the implementation of negotiations over the restoration of trade and transport. And I do think this is a win-win. Regarding the 3+3, I'm very skeptical, but even more than skepticism, I'm opposed, mainly because I see it as a threat. The format of the 3+3, echoing and bolstering Ambassador Kelly's points, tends to offer a dangerous legitimization or credibility for the authoritarian states of Turkey and Russia, as well as the theocracy in Iran. Not exactly something we want to do to strengthen independence and sovereignty. And the related challenge here is a 3+3 format from a Georgian perspective is also from an Armenian perspective a destructive option that only undermines independence. And I do think we need to focus on 3 before we expand to 3+3. But I do want to add, we do see Russia's position in this region, in my opinion, based more on weakness than strength. Despite a unilateral military withdrawal, deployment, we see Russia's approach and engagement much more based on coercion. And I do think the West has an advantage of attraction over Russian coercion. So I do think we need to talk a little bit more, not only about US re-engagement to overcome benign neglect, but also the opportunities from European engagement, which is perhaps less provocative to Moscow.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. I will have additional question then. I hope I will have a time for this, Mr. Ahmad Alili. So the format, for example, 3+3 format is proposed by Azerbaijani government and Turkish government. Unfortunately, this time we don't have a representative from Turkey, but we will have for sure in the next meeting as we did before. From Azerbaijani perspective, or from your perspective, like for Georgia, you know the risks. You know that it's very dangerous. Georgia is occupied, and etc. At the moment, we have Georgia, Turkey, Azerbaijan strategic partnership, lots of contracts signed, lots of agreements, lots of ongoing activities, and etc. Georgia has relations with Armenia, and Azerbaijan is now in the process of, I would say, peace-building process with Armenia. Maybe it will come to some results. So why do you think it's profitable for Azerbaijan first, and then to Georgia or Armenia to take part, for example, in 3+3? And do you see some other formats?
First of all, let me say that 2020 Karabakh War changed basically everything. So there is no way to go back. We need to form a new regional format. So for the last 30 years, what was existing, and this from Azerbaijan perspective, the Karabakh conflict, the Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict, is not obstacle for the regional integration anymore. So it can, all this integration, regional integration project that was proposed in the 90s, 2000, and failed because Azerbaijan didn't want to take part of this process. Now it won't. So that's why there is no returning back and to the pre-27 September 2020 situation. So we have to figure out something new. That's challenge. It's unavoidable. So in this search of the new platform, the minimum for Azerbaijan basically was that to make sure that there is no new war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So in order to achieve that, you have to make sure that Armenian and Azerbaijan economies are integrated. But when you integrate Armenian-Azerbaijan economy, Azerbaijan-Georgian economy is already integrated, and you cannot leave Georgia apart from this regional platform because it might seen as under Georgia integration. So that's why, and many people in Georgia back then, there was quite many social media sharings about the transit routes and the economic cooperation between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Azerbaijan and Georgia getting a bit weaker because of what's happening between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But that's the issue. You have to, once you have this kind of cooperation between Armenia and Azerbaijan, you have to bring in like the Georgia also. Again, Georgian Azerbaijan economic integration is already quite, it's the fact. So, but at the same time, Azerbaijan-Georgian relations, it cannot be seen separate from the presence of the Turkey in this the platform. And also, Turkey is the only country that has borders, land borders with Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan in Nakhchivan. So so Turkey automatically becomes part of this new integration project. And once you have Turkey in this platform, so it means that the whole platform, Azerbaijan brought in its own strategic partner, but Armenia is left without its own strategic partner in the platform. So you bring in, Russia to that platform also. At the end, when you have Russia and Turkey represented in this platform, it might seem as anti-Iranian. So that's why you bring in Iran also to make sure that nobody feels left away from the process. So this is very important. Now, we discussed this issue. This is, again, this is how Azerbaijan, going back to the pre-27 September 2020 is not possible. You have to figure out something, and this is the 3+3 somehow naturally merged platform. But then, if Azerbaijan brought in its own strategic partner, Armenia brought in its own strategic partner, why Georgia shouldn't bring in its own strategic partner or partners from its United States and the European Union? And through Georgia, we can make sure that there is a representativeness of liberal countries, liberal democracies in this platform. Also, it's very essential. And I believe that for many in Azerbaijan, including myself, I would say that it's quite a wishful scenario when Georgia acts like that and brings in European Union and Americans, the United States, the process. That would create it. Again, this is the alternative platform, but the President Aliyev several weeks ago, he said that he mentioned that if somebody doesn't want to take participation, it can leave. It was said at the height of the Iranian-Azerbaijani, tensions. So it means that this idea is quite a flexible idea. It's not something fixed. We can work on that. So right now, the idea is, from Azerbaijan perspective, is to make sure that there is some sort of regional integration. But how you achieve it, like that these three countries integrated without not integrating somebody from outside, it's very, very hard. But what we can do if we are situated in the middle of the non-liberal countries, this is the geography. So, but again, this is the idea. 3+3 is open for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll have two very short questions, if possible, to you, Mr. Alili. First one is why, as Rичард Гирагосян just said, why can't it be, for example, three regional countries? And then any regional country may cooperate as they did before, or even more, with other countries like Turkey, Russia, United States, and etc. Why should we call it 3+3? And when you know, from Azerbaijani perspective, when you know that Georgia will react, so like it will be tense, it will be like discussed as something really dangerous for the country, unacceptable for the country, maybe we should just change the name. If you say it could be different, it could be flexible, let's just say 3 and then decide which country will just join in accordance to some specific projects and etc. Please.
Yes, a valid point. Also, I mentioned Azerbaijan-Georgian relations. You cannot, like once you say Azerbaijan-Georgian relations, you automatically say Azerbaijan-Georgian Turkish relations. This is quite natural that Turkey and Azerbaijan, this is how it works. And also, if Azerbaijan starts economic integration with Armenia, and you cannot imagine Azerbaijani-Armenian peace process without Armenian-Turkey peace process. So whatever you do, at the end, Turkey ends up in the middle of the region. So if you can make Russia and Iran agree that Turkey is going to be in the middle of the region, they are not, well, why not?
Thank you. I will ask Mr. Sergi Kapanaze, please comment on the 3+3 format. Maybe you have other ideas of how to create some other formats for regional cooperation, please.
Thank you, Егор. I actually took part in the South Caucasus Stability Platform idea initiative, which was born back in 2008, right after the Georgia-Russia war. I took part, I think we had 6 meetings, something like that. I was leading our delegation from at that time. Those were the weirdest diplomatic negotiations I've ever attended, honestly. There were 5 participants and 3 pairs did not speak with each other, like literally. And so, 5 people around the table and 3 of them don't speaking with each other. I can tell you one thing, the initial paper, which was put forward by the Turkish side at that time, was actually closer to the consensus than the final paper 6 rounds down the road. And now, but that is past. But I think there's one thing we can do. We can compare the two. And at that time, we took part in it because it was the Turkish idea right after the war. And Turkey, at that time, if you remember, made a very interesting gesture supporting our territorial integrity, even visiting Abkhazia. In other words, taking our side in their confrontation. And then their idea came forward, and we kind of agreed. Russia agreed reluctantly, I would say. And we took part in those meetings together with the Azeri and Armenian friends and Russian colleagues. But everybody was waiting for that to collapse. There was no interest from any side to see that as a successful format. And then Turks at that time were very pragmatic. When they saw that there was no future in that, they actually suspended the meetings. So I would say the major difference is that if this one actually launches with the Georgian participation, I don't see how this will not be protracted for years and how this will not create the illusion among our Western partners that these countries in the South Caucasus region are dealing with the problems themselves, with the Russian, Turkish, and Iranian participation. I don't think that is conducive to our interests at all. Now, the other difference is that at that time, Iran was not present. I remember our northern neighbor trying to drag Iran to the table, asking everybody that we should also invite Iran. I also remember one of the participant states, I'm not going to name, coming with the geographic maps, explaining to us how Iran was not in the South Caucasus. A very funny exercise for an hour and a half with the maps and the explanation that Iran has nothing to do or should have nothing to do with this format. So now this is the format in which there is a clear Russian interest, clear calling from the Minister Lavrov how important it is for us to take part in it. And we also saw the Secretary of Defense of the United States yesterday making a statement, basically saying that Russia first needs to abide with the agreements it has signed, like the August 12, as opposed to dragging Georgia into something new. So I think it's very clear for us that it's not in our national interest to take part in these kind of formats. This is going to be a swamp from which it will be very hard to climb out. Now, this is not to say, however, that Georgia should cooperate with Azerbaijan and Armenia in the regional whether this is the connectivity programs or whatever, because we have excellent relations with both. And if there is a perspective for the regional economic further cooperation, obviously this is not going to happen without Georgia. So whether this is the transit route or whether this is new ideas and new initiatives in the economic field, I think we should be on board. But I don't believe in the regional formats with the Russian, Turkish, and Iranian dominant roles in that. And the final point, at that time, there was a very, I would say, healthy interest on the side of the US and the European Union in this, at that time, South Caucasus Stability Platform. Our American and European Union colleagues at quite a high level always expressed interest in how this was going. They were, in a way, supporting of that format. But I don't think the same is happening now. So I think it's very clear for us that we should look for the other regional formats. Now, as we speak, as the Eastern Partnership Summit approaches, there is a discussion about what should happen to the so-called trio format with Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. There are new ideas. I think one paper just came out today with our Lithuanian friends from the European Parliament authoring it about the new ideas how the European Union can have new approach towards these trio countries. In other words, how to enhance that regional cooperation. So if you ask me, we should have the priorities elsewhere, but not to the detriment of the bilateral Georgian, Azerbaijani, and Georgian Armenian interests. But regional formats for us is not 3+3 format.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I would add, if I may, that for me, for example, I think everyone knows that I work on anti-occupation issues and anti-propaganda, countering disinformation issues 24 hours. So for me, it will be very challenging if Georgia joins any format with Russia to say anything for international communities or in Georgia about some occupation, let's stop Kremlin, kidnapping Georgian people, and etc. when Georgia is a part of some Russia's-backed format. And of course, from my perception, maybe it's not right, any format with Russia like this, they will never agree on some Western role in this format. It's not something they really want. So it's very tricky. And we don't have Turkish representative today as we usually do. So I would say that Georgia for sure is like no one here is opposing Turkish, Azerbaijani strategic partnership with Georgia. It's very good, it's very active, and maybe again some 3 countries of the region plus their partners, but not inside of any format. It can work in reality. Ahmad, if you want to add something, please, but very shortly. I should ask other speakers as well.
Okay, on that point, I had the conversation on various international platforms with the Russian representatives on this issue, and they said Europeans yes, United States no. So they were like keen to have European representatives in this platform, but they said no to and you can understand. But I believe that it's up to Georgia, like if Georgia is taking place in this platform, so Georgia should bring in the country that it wants to be present. So again, if there is the platform is not good enough, so what's the alternative? So this is very important. So far the idea is that it's not good. Okay, but what's the alternative? So thank you.
Yeah, and this is the perfect question. What is the alternative? And that's what we should think about. Ambassador Gigиадзе, could you please say a few words also about, do you see any alternative? What is your perception, or maybe you mentioned it in your op-ed, what could be in parallel with this 3+3 offer from Azerbaijan and Turkey? We didn't make any other actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very interesting that first, the cooperation between 3 countries should increase, and we of course see the very good strategic relations between Azerbaijan and Georgia and Turkey. It's funny enough to mention that initially this initiative of the regional cooperation, the broader regional cooperation, was mentioned by President Shevardnadze in 1996. No one remembers it, but it has started from Georgia actually. It was coming from Georgia, but with the time the reality has changed. I mean, Sergi mentioned 2008 and post 2008. Events when Turkey came up with this new platform, but at that time we had absolutely different reality between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And Azerbaijan was one of the countries who immediately refused to join this platform. And the argumentation was very similar to what Georgia can say right now, because to stay in one format with a country which is occupying their territories was absolutely unacceptable and unimaginable for Azerbaijan at that time. So the situation really changes. And until, of course, until the territorial integrity, sovereignty of the countries involved will not be respected by all the parties who are to be considered the members of this format, I think nothing will change from the Georgian perspective. Alternative, what can be the alternative? It's difficult to say. I mean, no one can forecast what will be what will be coming in the next years. Russia is not going to withdraw the recognition of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, South Ossetia anytime soon. We don't see any steps towards the de-escalation of the situation inside our occupied territories, and Russia does everything in order to increase the tension on the occupied parts of Georgia. So this will be absolutely no-go from the Georgian point of view. But any other economic cooperation between three countries of the Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and it was very correctly mentioned that Georgia and Azerbaijan are very closely cooperating for many years, and we can be considered as a chain of countries coming from Caspian Sea to the Black Sea and farther through Georgia to Turkey and farther. And this kind of cooperation is very much welcome from our point of view. But our aim is very clear. The decision of the Georgian people, absolute majority of the Georgian population, is to become the members of the European Union and NATO. I think nothing can challenge that. Any constellation, any setup which will undermine this notion, which will undermine the decision of the Georgian people. I mean, this is included in the preamble of our new version of our constitution, that we will become the members of both organizations, will not be acceptable, and none of the governments in Georgia will be able, or any party will be able to even start the discussion about it. So therefore, we need to look ahead and see how can we develop ourselves in other way, in a much better way than in this constellation. I personally think that Russia tries to exclude the West from the Black Sea region and to try to keep this region closed from any participation, from any Western involvement in the processes going on in this part of Europe, which is absolutely unacceptable for us, and should be unacceptable for Armenia and Azerbaijan as well. And we'll continue our very active cooperation and participation in the association partner and the Eastern Partnership Initiative, and we'll look forward to the new suggestions and offers coming from the EU with regard to this new trio, Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova. But now it will be difficult for me to forecast what would be the best or agreeable solution for everyone.
Sure. Thanks a lot for your comments. And I would just add again that from Georgian maybe perspective, like, yes, Georgia has outstandingly very good relations with both Azerbaijan and Turkey in regard to this format, and of course with Armenia. So if Armenia now is able to join this cooperation, or will be able to join this cooperation, just join, why not? And that's it. I would like to ask I'm very sorry, Ambassador Kelly, for asking this, but you are representative of the West today. And as you said, there is no West in this process. There was no West, and Russia took the leadership role. But whose fault is that? Did the West do everything needed to be in parallel with Russia taking part in conflict resolution? And what role do you think the West should take now, please?
Thanks, Yegor. If I could start with just a brief comment on the 3+3 format, I think, just to be very clear, I think the 3+3 format in the medium to long term is a dead end. It is by definition a limited arrangement, and it's a limiting arrangement. When you look at the +3 participants, Russia seeks to limit Georgia's foreign policy priorities. Iran seeks to limit Azerbaijan's foreign policy choices, particularly vis-a-vis Iran. And there historically are few more fraught relationships than the relationships between Turkey and Armenia. I really think it is time for the West to step up and try. I mean, we have we have configurations, of course. In Europe, we have NATO and the EU, and we have the 3Cs initiative with 12 EU countries, but there's no connectivity across the Black Sea. And I think it is time for the West to step up. It's in the West's interests to have a more resilient and secure states on the southeast flank of NATO and the EU. And I really think that's the way to go. We would need, of course, the help of the three Caucasus states as well. The three Caucasus states would have to talk about reinvigorating this inclusive arrangement, which existed before via the OSCE. Why invent a new multilateral configuration when there is already an inclusive multilateral configuration that includes economic initiatives, and that's the OSCE. But it is so this is the sovereign choice of those three countries, of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. And I've yet to hear, well, maybe that's not fair, but there needs to be a strong voice saying that we want connectivity beyond our immediate neighbors for us to really become prosperous, resilient states. We need trade and investment. We need new trade routes. Obviously, we need good relations with our immediate neighbors, but for real growth and prosperity and true security, we need a more inclusive arrangement for our three countries.
Just a brief question, Ambassador. Do you think maybe OSCE Minsk group for some regional countries, it became not, as they say from time to time, not very effective? And let's just think about some alternative, because I agree with Azerbaijani and Turkish experts when they say we offered something, you offer something else. So would you say that, for example, for United States, Europe, the West, joining some 3+3 West is possible?
I think given the important trade relationship between the U.S. and the EU, I think that some kind of 3+X would have to include the EU and more broadly the United States. And I can see how that would be possible if this was just the decision of the three countries and the EU and the US. But I fear that that Russia, given its track record over the last 10 years or so, elbowing out the US and France, for example, from the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, elbowing out the United States in other kind of security arrangements in Central Asia after Afghanistan. The goal of Russia seems to be to prevent such an arrangement. But that's why I say this, really the three countries themselves have to take the initiative and say, what do you want? Don't let other countries dictate to you what the arrangements should be.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So like to finalize, and I would ask now briefly comment on some recently offered by Georgian side, some platform, our distinguished expert from Armenia and Azerbaijan. But like to finalize, as I see again, 3+3 format for Georgia and maybe Armenia is not something like really effective, but I would agree that yes, of course, we have OSCE Minsk group, but some regional players do not see it as effective. It's understandable. So maybe we should think more actively about some new formats that will be appropriate for all sides, like not specifically 3+3, but something else that could really work. 3+3 will not, because like for Georgia, it's just impossible. And recently, I don't know whether it is possible also because there is no Russia. Recently, Georgian Prime Minister Garibashvili said about some new platform for Azerbaijan and Armenia to talk, to meet, to discuss in Tbilisi with participation of Western friends. Please, Richard and Ahmad, what do you think about it? Richard, floor is yours.
Well, to be honest, I think we're putting too much energy into the discussion on this format or that format. I'm much more focused on the substance, the content. In other words, we've now seen an optimistic, promising return to diplomacy. All we have is a fragile ceasefire with the unilateral Russian deployment of troops in Nagorno-Karabakh. In other words, the practical urgency is actually basic minimum diplomatic engagement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the return of prisoners, an end to border clashes, rather than any kind of substantial opening or ambitious program of a 3+3+3. In other words, it's not the mathematics that counts. It's a human calculus of real security and stability. And in this post-war environment, I do think the view from Baku, the view from Armenia is the status quo is very fragile. The post-war outlook for stability remains unresolved. And until we can actually solve the challenge and burden of reopening borders that have been closed for far too long, restoring trade and transport links, building bridges not just to each other, but also with Georgia, playing a mediating role, until these pressing issues are resolved, I don't see any real statesmanship or strategic vision in terms of the format. And in conclusion, I would say there is no conclusion. This is very much a dynamic, not static process.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Alili. I think you heard, of course, about the statement by Georgian Prime Minister when he said that we offer some new platform for Azerbaijan and Armenia with participation of Western friends. We don't have any details, unfortunately, but like there is no Russia or Iran and etc. How do you look at it? Is it profitable for Azerbaijan? Does Azerbaijan need this platform in Tbilisi?
First of all, I would love to say that we desperately need the presence of the Western actors in our region, especially the United States. And we are happy that the recent developments that's happening with the visits of the high-ranking senior officials, to the region, it's welcome. Like this, thanks to the unilateral world and this, we had somehow relatively peace in the region for those 30 years, and the great power competition is back in the region. So that's why we need a bit more presence of the Euro-Atlantic actors in our region for the sake of the peace. First of all, I have to mention that. Second issue about the Tbilisi platform. Yes, Azerbaijan is for alternative platforms. Right now, there are basically three platforms. It's OSCE Minsk Group. It is a trilateral group of the Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, which emerged as a result of the three-party statement. And this is the newly merged Tbilisi or Georgia platform. Why, from Azerbaijan, from Baku's perspective, OSCE Minsk Group is a platform where it allows Russia to take its own proposals and say that it's proposal on behalf of the all OSCE Minsk Group. So it's going to legitimize the Russian proposals and present it as international community's proposals. That's what been, for the last 15, 20 years. So that's why for Azerbaijan, the Western countries being less engaged with the OSCE Minsk Group, that's why Azerbaijan is looking for the alternative and the platforms. So that's why, and the second platform is also a certain challenge. So that's why more platforms that Azerbaijan and Armenia can use, more platforms. It's better. I believe that it's like that. And the President Aliyev, when Georgian PM Gorbachev was in Baku, they talked and he made quite a positive statements on this regard. So that's why alternative platforms, it's good for Baku.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I would say to our Georgian speakers that in 3 weeks, I'm initiating Georgia's talk in this regard to find a role for Georgia in this regional developments, not in 3+3, but like what could we do? What is the role of the country in these developments? And we will have lots of time to discuss it. I'm very grateful to all our participants, speakers, and guests of today's webinar, and it will be uploaded tomorrow in the evening, and I will send you the link. And I will also send you the link to the op-ed prepared by PRC in regard to 3+3 format. Thanks a lot for joining us today.